Well, hey everyone, welcome to another amazing session here at Observe. Today we have amazing leaders from across the ML Ops and ML Lifecycle joining us today. This is actually an amazing panel of incredible founders speaking today. Would love to maybe just kick off with some intros, and then I think there's a lot of questions around how does this world adapt to generative that we'll be talking about today. My name is Aparna, founder of Arize, and Manu, you want to kick us off with intros?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Manu Sharma. I'm founder and CEO at Labelbox. Labelbox is a data engine for developing a wide range of AI applications from computer vision to natural language processing systems. And so super excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Robert, you want to go next?
Hey, I'm Robert. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Anyscale. So we are providing infrastructure for scaling and productionizing AI applications, and in particular, generative AI applications. So think about image generation, large language models, and the kind of workloads you can imagine. People scaling and productionizing on top of our stuff is our training models, fine-tuning models, deploying the models and serving, as well as doing batch inference and both online and offline. So those are we see a lot of computer vision, natural language processing, and really excited to be here.
Go for it, Mike.
Okay, I was waiting for you to say. Hey everybody, I'm Mike. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Tecton. At Tecton, we make feature infrastructure. So if you go to like a Google or a Facebook, there's literally hundreds of people building all of the infrastructure to support the data pipelines, to generate fresh features, keep them up to date, to serve them to your models in real time, to help keep track of them, monitor, share them. These are all important things to build into an ML platform. We think of what we're doing at Tecton as building the best feature infrastructure in the world, especially for real-time production ML applications. We make Feast, which is an open source feature store, and we make Tecton, which is an enterprise feature platform. And before doing Tecton, I actually worked with Aparna at Uber, and we worked on the Michelangelo system, helped start the ML team, and built out the Michelangelo ML platform there, which is pretty interesting.
Yep, those were great days. Awesome. Chris, last one. Let's go.
Cool. Hey, everyone. I'm Chris Van Pelt, one of the co-founders of Weights and Biases. So at Weights and Biases, our mission is to build the best developer tools we can for machine learning engineers. We're probably most well known for our experiment tracking platform. And we've since built a number of additional product offerings to help with data lineage, collaboration with reports, model registry, and we just released a new set of functionality around CI/CD and automation. So we love ML engineers, we love building tools, and really excited to be on the panel today. Also, one last thing, in a prior life, was working on a very similar problem to Manu at Crowdflower Figure 8. So I've been in this space for a long time, and it couldn't be a more exciting time to be in this space. So I'm really looking forward to chatting about this new era.
Awesome. Well, I've actually been really, really looking forward to this session. So thank you all so much for being here. It's really hard to get leaders across different stages of ML all in a room. So my one ask, the reason we're doing this live, is a lot of great hot takes will be very appreciated. I'm sure the audience will love it. So you guys all started your companies before the wave of LLMs really became hyped. And I think there's a theme that I'd love to talk about, which is where does ML Ops or the ML lifecycle adapt in the age of generative? So first, maybe a little bit of just general question. Are you all already seeing LLMs in production, or is it mostly still experimental? That's for anyone here.
Yeah. So we see a lot, at least from what I've seen. We do see both, but a lot of the projects are new initiatives. A lot of the projects that we see are people, businesses trying to figure out they know they need to succeed with AI, right? To succeed with LLMs and use LLMs to add value to their product or their toast. But there are a lot of different ways that could look, and they're still exploring and prototyping, trying to iterate quickly to see what the right product UX and value they add to their product is. So a lot of these are just brand new initiatives that are kicking off now.
For us, I think we may live in a slightly different kind of stage of the life cycle than a lot of other kind of ML tools might fit, because at the feature platform is like the whole value of it is we help you do something in production, really, at scale and real time. If you have an ML application where you're not really, there's not this concept of like being in production and supporting your users' real-time interactions or transactions or something like that, you don't have this productionization problem that we solve. So we see, I suspect, less of the LLM stuff, because we don't really work as much in the kind of like experimental phase, trying to figure things out in very, very kind of earlier stage of sophistication or maturity of use cases. However, we see the use cases that we work with are people trying to detect fraud, people trying to do real-time pricing, real-time recommendations, personalization, stuff like that. And we're getting those people starting to ask us a lot about LLMs. Like, hey, can I also use everything that I've built for my fraud model or for my recommendation system and kind of use it to do this extra little thing, this other thing, let's reuse the same stuff I've already built for an additional use case. But we're not seeing a lot of people having figured that out yet, but they're starting to poke around.
Got it.
Yeah, I'd echo the same. Like if you look at your Twitter feed or like Hacker News, it seems like everyone's making really cool stuff. But in the enterprise, everyone's talking about it. But I think there's a ton of big open questions still around how to bring this into production and which path to take, whether it's using a third-party API or kind of building your own model or fine-tuning. So it's early days, but it's wild to it's like 4 months ago ChatGPT was released. We were like really excited by GPT-2 or just the GPT-3 APIs before, but it seems like just in the last 4 months now it's the topic. So I think we'll see a lot more in the coming months.
Yeah, and I see two kind of categories of applications, so the number one is, of course, consuming these LLM APIs, right? So you've got a model, and you're essentially using that to power your existing application that is, transcribing a chat, like a conversation, or summarizing a conversation. And these kind of use cases are definitely in production. I mean, we are actually using so much of our products. It's likely that the products that we are using or interacting have these features now powered by LLMs. So there's it might be one of the fastest technology adoption that I have personally seen across the wide range of applications. The other category is the businesses or ML teams customizing these LLMs, whether it's in prompt or in context learning or fine tuning LLMs, and those are still very early days. I mean, remember, like for most businesses or for most machine learning teams who were just entering 2023 with their year plan, got out of the window after ChatGPT moment, and it probably will take quite some time for all these teams to adapt, align, and execute on the new plans.
Actually, Aparna, I want to add a little, if it's okay, a little nuance to my original answer. I think there are two main areas where we see LLMs already in production in a meaningful way. So one is we work with a lot of AI startups, and so these many of these companies were started specifically to use because of LLMs. And so when they're shipping their products, they are already in production. And the second is we work with a bunch of companies that have NLP based products. Like their whole product is, or an important aspect of their product is processing documents or improving search or things like that. And in those cases, where you're already doing natural language processing, that, productionizing LLMs in that context is a natural step, and clear how to do that. I think the cases where we see a lot more exploratory prototyping about how to productionize LLMs are the cases where you don't have your product is not naturally a language-based or an NLP product. And so, but you still believe you can use LLMs to, make the UI, like the user experience better, make it easier to use your product, lower the barrier to entry. And so those are, create language as a way to interface with your product. Those are the kinds of ways, areas where we see more exploration.
Aparna, we're not going to let you get even past the first question here.
I gotta my next question.
Let me add one more thing. I think that there's even the question, what are we seeing and go to production is kind of interesting, because there's kind of like a parallel question, which is like, what are the sets of problems that enterprises, companies are thinking of taking on with machine learning? And has the introduction of all this LLM stuff affected what that scope of problems is that makes sense for someone to build? And what the LLMs have done is kind of moved the competitive frontier on a variety of use cases, meaning like what's actually cool, what's actually the like best possible experience is kind of different now. It's way better, let's say, for certain types of things. But there's also, that comes with the added complexity. Like for me as a company, am I going to be able to build that now? Well, that's way farther away. So maybe now I'm going to choose to buy just from some, maybe I'll choose to buy from a marketing vendor who will automatically, optimize my text instead of me building that internally as like from some internal team. And I think that's actually probably a meaningful impact that we should consider along the way. So you may have an LLM in production because you're using a vendor that is powered by LLMs, but maybe you're not actually building that system internally as much anymore.
Got it. Okay, just a tangent on the first question. At least what use cases do you think we will see less of powered by typical or traditional ML? Like, OpenAI in the last session was saying sentiment classification's dead. You're going to use an LLM to do that. And, but there's going to be all these new emergent skills and new ML use cases that are now opened up because of these models. What dies? What stays? What do you guys think?
I think
the most impressive thing. Oh, sorry, Robert.
No, please go ahead.
You sure? All right. Yeah. I think the most impressive thing about LLMs is their ability to be so flexible, right? The zero shot or few shot learning, where you just give it a little bit of indication of what you want it to do, and suddenly you can have a sentiment classifier or a variety of different use cases. So I think that's what is the scariest thing about this, right? Because you're asking, all right, well, what traditional machine learning modeling does there need to be? I think in the near term there needs to be a lot still. I mean, there's very specialized use cases, especially in the computer vision world. Although the things happening in the generative vision world are also really exciting. But I mean, I guess my answer is, I don't know. It's definitely changing. I think I agree. Sentiment analysis. Why spend a bunch of time if you can get the same accuracy out of kind of a few shot prompting of these large, powerful models?
Yeah, I do think people will still want to know the sentiments in a lot of cases, right? They won't have, but if they'll be able to tackle more ambitious problems, and it'll be kind of a simple, subroutine or thing that just gets taken into account by a larger overall model. I think one thing I don't think will show up so much is just like a lot of the NLP subroutines, like part of speech tagging, probably won't be as important. I think that's because that was always just an input to other downstream tasks that you're doing, and you won't need to go through that intermediate step anymore.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I would actually expand the scope from sentiment analysis to just like data categorization. I think data categorization by and large is going to be solved, or is already being solved, and it will be solved. And so classifiers, you don't need to build those models yourself, likely. And a variety of NLP tasks traditionally, like parts of speech, entity recognition, things like that, are also, we are looking at basically at the frontier, like at the edge, where it's going to be mostly solved by LLMs. If not one, you could use multiple LLMs in conjunction to doing that task. What's really fascinating to me is that, there's this whole rule-based approach that emerged to dealing with these NLP tasks. Like you can programmatically label data, with regex queries and things like that. I actually think that is all being disrupted with LLMs, because these rules are in many ways some things that LLMs can actually do already. Like LLMs can do very great regex queries itself, things like that. So I think we are in a very interesting time this next few months, this year, where we might see a major disruption of most of the ways people went about building the classical NLP systems.
Got it. Okay, I'm gonna take a little turn here, unless someone has.
You wanted hot takes, right? So I have a question for Manu. Are we going to, in the future, label all of our data, or are we just going to generate all of our data?
So I think I've always thought of the problem as like there's some level of supervision required at the moment, and it's really the focus of where the supervision is. A few years ago, the supervision was primarily on labeling the data and doing it very meticulously. Now the supervision is more moving towards more on the feedback. Like the models are already kind of out of the box, like great, and you kind of like prompting and saying like, hey, I want you to do X, or I want you to not do X, Y, or Z. And so the supervision is the focus is moving, and I think it seems to be that in the near term there will be some level of supervision still required. And even if we, let's say, completely get rid of supervision, the very act of just monitoring your ML systems and fine-tuning the knobs to ensure the AI system is doing what you want it to do would probably become a new definition of supervision. Kind of like you're in a control room and you have all the knobs and dials, and the nuclear reactor is sort of working, and you're just mostly monitoring the system, and that becomes perhaps a new definition of supervision. So yeah, I think labeling is in many ways should be seen as converting unstructured data to some structured information to power downstream applications. And there are lots of use cases where you do need a sentiment analysis, like a tag, one of the enum options to power logical systems downstream. And so I think that will largely be automated. I hope it gets automated. It will be super fun and easy for everyone, and make machine learning accessible.
Yeah, I'll echo, like when we don't supervise these things, that makes me really nervous, right? I want to make sure we're watching and measuring.
Yeah, exactly.
Robert, you're stealing the next set of questions straight out of my mouth. So I think I love it. I think there's a bunch of questions we've had from our users about how do LLMs change the ML ops or ML workflows today. And Manu, one of the questions was what Robert asked you. So how does this impact labeling? Will labeling happen? Chris, I guess the question for you all is, what does experiment tracking mean in this era? Is that tracking prompts now? Like, what does that look like in the era of LLMs?
Yeah, well, when we look at LLMs, we see kind of three primary use cases, right? There's one, the LLM creators, and we're fortunate enough to be helping LLM creators like OpenAI and Cohere actually build their foundation models. But there's only going to be so many of those, right? Now, how many will create from scratch is still an open question, but we don't think it's enough to like just focus all of our business on the LLM creators and stay with kind of traditional experiment tracking. Then we have LLM fine-tuners, right, where you kind of take a foundation model and then fine-tune the learned weights for your specific data set. I think this is still emerging, but it's not clear how common this is going to be either. With the latest iterations of these models, it seems like maybe solely with prompting, or as the contexts get bigger, you can achieve a lot of the benefits you could get from fine tuning. So then there's the last area, which I think is the most exciting area right now as a company that's building developer tools, which is the prompt engineers. The often, like, you know, my background is more application development. I love making things. Now we've enabled all of these creators to use AI and machine learning without having this traditional background, but they still need a lot of new tools and ways to ensure that their applications are doing the right thing. Like, it's tempting to just trust that it's going to work out, but I mean, you need new tools now to actually measure how these models are functioning within your application to have some measure of quality. And it's a pretty big paradigm shift to go from application development, where you could define logic and then write a test to say, if this, then it's okay. If that, then it's not okay. So now we have this probabilistic outcome that is somewhere in between, and you need a way to actually measure and watch that. So this makes our jobs as a company that's building developer tools harder, right? Before we could focus on this one persona that we knew really well, and now we have a much broader set of personas. But that's an exciting opportunity for us. So in London, we just released our new Weights and Biases prompts offering, which is really about tools to help with debugging chains. So we have integrations with LangChain and OpenAI's tooling. We expect there to be a number of other frameworks and systems that get released to help with chaining these things together and creating kind of tools and agents. So yeah, we're holding on for the ride, but it's definitely an area we're investing a lot in, and think it is going to really change the way applications are built.
Got it. That's super exciting. Mike, I guess I'm jumping over to you. How does this impact feature stores? And I guess bigger meta question for you: is there still tabular data in this world?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this LLM stuff affects almost all MLOps tools in a big way, because there's a lot of changes to the core workflows, and there's also there remains a lot of uncertainty about the workflows. For example, Chris was just saying, we don't know like how much people are going to be fine-tuning things in the future. It could be the case where just like foundation models are what everybody depends on, or it could be the case that everyone's going to be fine-tuning, for their use case internally in their organization. And then it's a question of, does that happen in your organization or through some external API, some vendor? And those different outcomes pretty dramatically affect like what is the workflow and what are the related tools, like what should everybody here be doing to help the users, right? In our world, so you asked, hey, is there still tabular data? And the answer is yeah. Like, tabular data is going to exist anyway. And I think the question that you're implying though is like, hey, is it still like very important to have and like be working with tabular data in machine learning context, or can we just dump all the raw data into these LLMs and just hope they kind of figure things out? Yeah. And what we're finding, so what is a feature, right? Like, a feature is just some data that you pass to your ML model to help your ML model understand the world in some way, right? So we kind of think of like the features as kind of like the way that ML models understand the world. In LLMs, they kind of have two ways that they can get data that they can kind of get information into them. One, they can memorize stuff. If I go on ChatGPT right now and I say, what's the capital of, England, I'm sure it knows that. It doesn't have to look that up somewhere. But you can imagine there's a lot of questions I would ask it where I have to pass in information like, what is the sentiment of this user ticket? Well, I got to pass in all the details of the user ticket, right? And, right now that task, let's say that task is done or respond to this user ticket, that's done by a human today. And what is the information that a human needs to do that task, right? We don't just give them the ticket, but in reality, we also give them a whole bunch more information about the customer's history. And we tend to do a lot of summarizing, organizing that data internally. what platform is this customer on? How many times did they submit a ticket in the past 30 days? What is the historical sentiment of this customer? A whole bunch of different like summaries, refining all the different data to make it something that you can kind of like easily reason about. And, you know, I think of LLMs as kind of like, and I didn't make this up, but somebody said this and I thought it was really nice, like calculators on words. They're like a reasoning engine. And so to the extent that we can provide information to them that is summarized and easier to reason with, that is going to make the LLM's job much easier. For example, today, I don't know how I could pass in all of the history of every possible thing that has happened related to a customer and in my organization into an LLM to make like a really fast inference. I'm sure stuff like that will become possible in the future, but a lot of the use cases we deal with are super real-time things that have like a crazy amount of context, and the data scientists put a lot of work into summarizing things to distill these features into very high information potency signals. So tabular data is still around, and productionizing this data and productionizing the systems that keep all of the signals that we know about the world, our customers, our items, our everything up to date and fresh, to be able to give this important view of the world, the data, into the models, the reasoning engines, such that they can make high quality decisions. That problem still exists no matter what kind of like reasoning engine you have, whether it's a traditional ML model or if it's an LLM. That will always be around. One of the biggest kind of changes, though, and I think we should, like, it's kind of interesting thing for us to all reflect on, is that you probably don't have to train a model anymore. And so a lot of the tooling that has gone into like model training, that's like the kind of offline online consistency stuff. The offline training workflow is not that important for a lot of people who are not dealing with model training, obviously. So that's a thing that affects us directly. And so we focus a lot more on the kind of like the production side of things that will always be relevant for every use case. Does that make sense?
Yep. And I think one of the points you made, and I think Carlos is actually asking in the chat, let me ask you, in the context of low latency, high throughput, ML-based solutions, the LLMs actually scale. And I think, at least what I've seen, love your take, Mike, is that it doesn't replace things like ranking models and recommendation models and ads, click-through rate model today. In the world of today, with that high throughput, it doesn't. Do you think it might?
It totally does not today. Who knows? It could in the future. A lot of these systems, like I used to work on the ads system, the ads click-through rate model at Google, super optimized, crazy scale, very driving a lot of revenue, highly productionized kind of stuff. And if I replace that with an LLM, that would be like, I'm imagining millions of times higher compute and more expensive to run at that type of scale. Not to say that it can't be done in the future. We just haven't gotten there technologically yet. I'd be really excited for us to get to that point. It's going to be an interesting position to be in. But a lot of ML systems today, particularly like ranking, fraud detection, personalization, a lot of these things have a lot of kind of optimization built into them that just means that they're not the first things that LLMs are gonna take over. A lot of the text stuff that we've been talking about that have historically been had poor performance from traditional ML systems are likely to be first on the chopping block, I think. and just one more thing, clarification on the training thing I was just saying. It's not to mean that there's no training. It's just decouples who's doing training and serving. There's someone else training the model now. And so that you don't need to have a workflow that works for both of those at the same time as commonly anymore.
Got it. Okay, well, this is actually a good segue into a debate I wanted to ask you all. So there's closed source models, the ones OpenAI's, the Anthropics. There's open source. You're all seeing the Hugging Face, Cerebras, that. And then there's these in-house LLMs where people are building them to be hyper personal, training it on their own data. Where do you think we go in a year from now? Do people build their own in-house? Do the open source stuff kind of pop off? Love to hear where each of your takes are on this. You want to kick us off, Manu?
Well, so I'll start with the caveats that I think this is one of the most strongest exponential technology trend, and so humans are gonna be extremely erroneous in making predictions on what will happen next. I've been so wrong in so many times in the last few months and years. So with that said, I think there's a room for both. My hunch is that for in the near term, the closed source LLMs are going to be able to provide a lot more. Like it is more like a product that offers all kinds of bells and whistles, like content safety, moderation, some enterprise features, scaling the APIs, and so forth. I think open source is likely going to catch up rather quickly, just because there's so much tremendous interest in the world, and so it is going to, the world is going to invent all these ways to do it themselves as well. I think what's really interesting to think is a little bit more broader term. So the compute cost or model training cost has been declining, I think, effectively at 78% or something per year. And that's, I'm quoting a research by ARK Invest that they have conducted recently. And if that trend continues, which I believe it has been continuing for the last 10 years or so, is that cost of training GPT-3 or 4 might be like $300 to $400,000 by 2030. And so if I look at that, and maybe there's some error margins, we're gonna just. It feels very natural to me that the world is just going to create all kinds of models, and they would want to have freedom to do so across the board. So I think we are definitely in a journey where we're going to see a lot of LLMs across the board, or a lot of like these foundation models, and perhaps the nuance or differentiation would be the corpus of data and the instruction set that is fine tuned or reinforced on, or things like that, techniques and so forth.
Got it. Okay, so Manu's kind of on the closed source for the beginning, market for both. Robert, what's your take on this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's important to remember that this is really right at the start, right? This is very nascent. Now, what we see, and I think over time, there's going to be just significant R&D effort going into making these models cheaper, faster, smaller, and sort of expanding into supporting some of these kinds of applications that Mike mentioned are not necessarily practical or cost effective today, right? So that's going to grow. What we see today is a lot of people actually combining, using both open source models as well as APIs, right? And sometimes stitching these together in the same application using tools like LangChain. And so, you may featureize your data using something like, or create embeddings using Hugging Face and open source models there. You may query an API. And these things all kind of integrate together. Now, I think what we'll see is significant progress on open source models. I think for open source models to be pervasive, they'll have to be good. Quality will be the number one factor there, determining if they're competitive or not. And I think based on the rate of progress that we've seen so far, of course, these things are hard to predict. I think that'll continue to grow. And I think you're going to see, as this stuff gets easier to do, as it gets cheaper to do, you're going to see a lot more of it. It's happening as opposed to less of it happening. People training models. I do think it's important to distinguish between the foundation model creators and then the consumers of these, these sort of people building products using these models. For the foundation model creators, and there are companies like, OpenAI and Cohere that use Ray to Ray's the open source project that we're building to train these models, or as well as open source versions like GPT-J, which are trained using Ray. There, the focus is on training, right, and creating the underlying model. And there is a tremendously difficult and expensive compute problem there. For everyone else, for everyone who is trying to build a product using these models, where we see the shift is that we see a shift away from, from training the model and creating the underlying foundation model to fine-tuning the model and serving the model. So that's where we see a huge growth in need, basically in infrastructure needs. This is people who want to take existing models, not necessarily spend $100 million to create the underlying foundation model, but actually to take a pre-trained model, fine-tune it using their own data, right, specific to their problem, use that to create a better experience for their product, and then actually ship that and deploy that as part of their product. And so, the infrastructure challenge gets much more challenging there as well, right? Because you are now deploying models that might require a bunch of GPUs, and you weren't, the way you were doing it before didn't require that, right? You might be, if you needing to ingest a ton of data to feed all of the GPUs to do fine tuning and to do that in a performant way. And I think one of the changes here is that we see a lot of an increased, interest in cost efficiency. Basically, how do I serve these models in a performant way, using a bunch of GPUs, but not spend, all of my money doing that? And I think that's an area where certainly, a lot of the work on infrastructure, a lot of the work that we are doing is about making it cost effective to do that.
On cost-effective piece, I was recently speaking with a AI leader at one of the biggest might be Fortune 50 companies, and it was really fascinating to see, like, certainly GPT-4 or an equivalent system can do all those tasks for conversational AI, but their scale is so big where like 70-80% of Americans are using their products, and if they want to bring that system at that scale, it would cost them fortune, versus like the alternative be a custom natural language system that they've purpose built for it, because the sheer amount of usage that there is, latency requirements and so forth. And so I think to your point, Robert, the cost and inferencing is going to likely be a very big factor in the short term, deciding like which direction people go to solving a problem. Ultimately, it has to solve a problem for enterprise or for business.
I think it's also interesting to just think about, like, there's a lot of uncertainty about what happens in the short term, but like, where are we converging to? And so I think one big question is the question of like, is the fine tuning thing going to be a big deal longer term? And either it is or it isn't. Let's say it isn't. Let's say foundation models just become so powerful you never need to fine tune anything, and you can just put everything in a prompt. Then who's going to make the foundation models? Is it going to be the best foundation models going to be like stability AI open source things, or are they going to be you just get it from an API from OpenAI? And my guess, this is kind of like my hot take, is that the closed source foundation model providers, just because of like economic incentives, are always just going to have more budget to build a better one. They're going to be a step ahead. They're just going to always be more powerful. But open source is going to be, coming after them, and is going to be like a close second. What does that mean in terms of like performance? Well, let's say, let's say the OpenAI foundation models up here, and the best open source one is can do 90% of the things that it can do. It's just a 10% performance decrease, right? Well, what does that mean for like the average person? Is it going to make sense for them to use the open source one or the closed source one? That's a very interesting question. That 10% difference in performance, how does that translate to the average ML use case? Which one should you choose? And I suspect there's going to be some people, for some use cases, there's definitely this is the performance of this model is the competitive frontier for what they're building for. Like, if it's like a fraud, I was talking about fraud a lot, that's going to save you directly more money if you have your model be slightly more accurate, right? But there's some times where, say sentiment classification, it works. If you just have the 90% one, it's good enough. And so that 10% performance boost, like what fraction of ML use cases are really going to benefit from that. And then for those folks, say it's also 10% of ML use cases that are like, hey, I can't use the open source one. I got to use the highest performance one, the closed source ML foundation model. How valuable is it for them to use that? Is that so much value that that continues to fund an OpenAI on an ongoing basis? That's a really interesting question to me. I suspect that it actually is a lot of value for those people who really need that extra little bit of performance, because when they need that extra little bit of performance, it's because their business demands it. They're making more money or saving a lot of costs based on that. And so that will drive significant revenues. And I think we see the same kind of parallels with a lot of other kinds of tools in the MLOps space too. You just see, more advanced organizations paying for the best tools to get the best workflows, even going from batch to real time, which is the thing that we talk about all the time. And that's the thing we did at Uber. We had the Uber's ETA models used to be all batch. And then we were like, you know what? This is probably just going to be so much better if we get real-time traffic signals and we do everything in real time. And we did that, and it just completely changed the accuracy of everything, and it was a really big deal. And I think we're going to see a lot of those kind of like step function changes in performance that will translate to value as you continue to go from open source to the additional level of performance from the closed source model. So that's my take on it. But that, again, that depends on having. That's all under the assumption that like fine tuning goes away, and the fine tuning sticking around longer term, that's a lot more uncertain for me.
So I got a perspective from a company, you all probably know the name, but they're using LLMs to generate content. One of the takes they had was use cases where they need to be hyper personal is where fine tuning is going to matter, where you can't just Mike, it goes back to your point of it's our competitive differentiation. We're an AI first company, and if we're just using the same off the shelf models as everyone else, what is is it just our UI? Like, is that our competitive differentiation? Well, it's got to be the content we produce. We have to be really, really good for the users that we provide. And this person kind of really believed that, their reason for fine tuning was to make the content that they generate hyper personal. Robert, I guess a question for you: what are the use cases you're seeing where people are fine tuning today, or anyone here really? Like, where do you guys think fine tuning will matter?
Yeah, I want to add on to that point. Yeah. I think if you are in this world where everyone is, using the pre-trained foundation model, right, and you're building your product on top of that, if you're building a business, you have to be adding value somewhere. And, similar to what this person is saying, what is that value? Now, one possible answer is that you have data that other people don't have, right? And you're bringing that data and injecting it into the machine learning in some way, right? That could be through fine tuning, that could be through retrieval, that could be done in a number of ways. But fine tuning is a big one that we see right now. Another option is that you're adding a lot of value in the application or the product that you're building on top of the model, and the model is not the key parts. And in that case, that means you're building a lot of logic around the model in the application layer, say at the serving side. And there we see more complexity shifting to model serving. And there it's typically not just a model behind an endpoint, and that's the whole story, but rather multiple models combined together, composed with other application logic. And there we see a growing need for just more expressivity in the serving logic. So I agree with this other take that you're referring to. Now you just asked, can you say the question again? You asked where do we see fine tuning being used?
Yeah. Like, can you anyone here give me examples where they've seen, okay, it's totally worth it for us to fine tune?
And also, I'll add on to the question. I'm really curious what you guys would say. Do you think it's going to stay like that in the future? Or do you think that use case for fine tuning is going to kind of like vanish over time?
Yeah. So right now we see fine tuning being used to improve performance for a lot of the time you have data that is not specifically what ChatGPT was trained on, right? It's your user data, or it's your it's like you're getting people to, you're doing code generation, you're trying to generate things where your workflow, you have a lot of data that you collect from your users about what good looks like, and the out of the box performance is just not quite there.
Yeah, I've seen language be an issue. If in just some examples to give you guys, language be an issue. I mean, Harvey's an example, and legal's one where maybe LLMs weren't trained on that type of data. I think especially in like biology, chemistry, kind of these deep science applications, like there's going to be applications there where you'll need to fine tune. And I think
exactly. I mean, like medical domain is an important one. Just anything that's really domain specific, where the stuff that you're doing, or that you need the language model to do, is not stuff that is already out there all throughout the internet.
I think fine tuning will be important, and it will continue to concentrate towards the most lucrative areas for businesses to invest in. And the reason for the way I think about it is that when you think about what makes a product very differentiated, right? So in a world, let's say you buy insurance from like Progressive, Geico, there's all these insurance providers, and they kind of generally have similar access to data. I think the differentiation is really like how they underwrite a particular case, and they all have biases, and because they have found those biases to be advantageous to them. And I would think that they would want to incorporate the data they have, but also the biases and the ontology of the business and the way they make decisions to infuse it into an AI model that specifically is uniquely theirs. And that's what I think is going to make these companies interesting and prevalent. Otherwise, we all have a base, like a single API that does everything, which seems to be, there's a non-zero chance that is possible, but it's unlikely because humans adapt and they find kind of the nuances. Like I'll take a coding as an example. One of the most interesting characteristics in software teams is that they ultimately, like some of the high performance software teams tend to have a style guide in terms of how they write software, what the patterns are and so forth, and what's allowed, what's not allowed. And I think we have yet to see a product for that. Like, hey, this is how Labelbox writes software, or this is like how Ray writes software, and the examples or suggestions are hyper specific to the organization. And so I think we are very early innings, and I would be surprised to, or I would not bet against human creativity, which is there will always be these nuances that ultimately makes interesting products and services in the market, which will probably require fine tuning.
Got it. Well, these were really great takes on fine tuning. Let's see what happens in a year from now. Okay, I'm going to change gears up a little bit before I hop into some audience questions. Well, first off, to even know if you need to fine tune or change up the LLM, you need to know if you need to be able to measure or troubleshoot LLMs and their responses. Chris, I guess this is a great one for you too, and especially with your new launch. How do you think troubleshooting LLMs will look like? In anything you've seen people do out there already?
Yeah, so last week at our event, we released an integration with OpenAI evals. So OpenAI created this, central repository to define a number of different ways to evaluate LLM output. So on the one end, if you're doing like sentiment analysis or multiple choice question answering, you have the truth. Maybe you worked with Manu to get it at Labelbox, and then you can evaluate how well the model's doing straight out of the box. If you're doing something like summarization or something that's a little more open-ended, the state of the art is like to have GPT grade it. which is wild to me. But I can't imagine, like, if I'm using GPT-3 to generate responses, then I can have GPT-4 grade it and have, you know, some meaningful signal there. You probably also want to work with Labelbox or a labeling provider to do, you know, additional labeling of those results. But I think this is like a big muscle that companies are going to need to learn how to flex if they really want to put this into production and then know with certainty as they modify their prompts or the underlying models themselves change that the accuracy of the output is good. And I think, you know, OpenAI Evals is one of many frameworks that are emerging to actually do this. But I think that is like kind of table stakes to really deploy this into production. So it's definitely something we're going to be watching closely, as I imagine Arize will as well.
Absolutely. It's a topic we're deeply interested in. All right, last question from me, and then I'll hop into audience questions. So you guys are the leaders, you know, leaders behind some amazing ML companies today. And data scientists and ML engineers who are watching this really want to know, how should they be preparing for this new era? What should they be doing or reading up on or kind of evangelizing inside of their companies to kind of bring forth the era of generative? Any advice you can share for the kind of young data scientists, ML engineers in the audience today? And it's for anyone. Manu, you want to kick us off?
I'm not a machine learning practitioner, I actually mostly learned machine learning by trying new things and learning online, going through all the courses and so forth. So, and I continue to do so. There's frankly, like, this group here produces amazing content, you know, so I particularly like Weights and Biases blog, and Labelbox has really interesting content as well for data centric workflows and how to automate them. And so, yeah, I think it's really just, you know, finding the sources for and continuing to learn. Yeah.
I think one thing
I would say make a demo. Just like play with it. It's so easy now and it's so fun. I wish I had more time to just go tinker with these things and make really cool demos. But that's really how we've approached a lot of our product development at Weights and Biases. Is we'll have an idea and we'll think, oh, that's cool, and then we'll make a demo that isn't production ready yet, but it gets the message across, and then people start to play with it and they talk about it, and suddenly there's enough momentum to get it deployed within the organization, and it's so fun. So fun.
I think that's really true. Actually, it feels so much easier to make them like compelling demos, and it's easier to get to like the point of magic with LLMs than pretty much any other technology that I've used before. And the thing that I think I would just like caution everybody on, or maybe just like encourage everybody to keep in the back of their mind as they're going through like the process that Chris was just saying, is, you know, then there's a phase where you want to like productionize an application. Eventually you're like, hey, I've got this cool demo. We want to actually, you know, put this in production and serve all our customers with it. And I think we've learned a lot of like lessons through the MLOps journey through the past couple of years, things that have worked and things that haven't worked, that are interesting to keep in mind, so we can like try to, you know, avoid some of the mistakes that have been made. And I think one of the bigger things that that I would try to avoid is having an organization where you set up a completely different technology stack, completely divorced from the existing business, divorced from the existing data stack, the existing, you know, data processing and production systems, where because you don't want your LLM team suddenly like responsible for all this stuff in production that uses completely different tools than everything else, and they get no support from all of the rest of the platform teams in the organization. That's a pattern that we saw a lot of the like kind of ML platform teams in bigger enterprises go through, and I think that was kind of painful. And we're seeing a lot of people like undo that over time, and a lot of these ML platforms, you know, now being kind of built more on top of the existing platforms in the data platforms, compute platforms, stuff like that in the company. And maybe just kind of as you're going from demo to production, worthwhile keeping that in the back of your mind. So that can be a less painful down the road process for you.
Yeah. I think the demo point is extremely good. The part that I would add to what people have said is to, take a step back. And I think there's going to be a lot of value to understanding some of the fundamentals here. So things like, understand what linear regression is and how that works, right? Understand what, why you wouldn't train on your test data, or what overfitting is, or all of these, some of the basic statistics or probability concepts. I think there's going to be a lot of foundational material like that is going to enhance your understanding and ability to use these tools as you build your demos and, help avoid some common pitfalls.
Awesome. All right. I got 1 or 2 questions from the audience, and then seriously, this session's been amazing. So thank you all for your being here. Lamia's asked, from what you've seen, what are the biggest hurdles, challenges to productionization of LLMs, technical and otherwise?
One of the biggest challenges that I think the industry is going to solve, I think it's a really interesting problem, is within an enterprise. Like, let's take an example of an LLM app, like question and answer. Like, if you're in a really large organization, you could, in theory, train a LLM on the corpus of data for knowledge base. You don't need to go through like 5 or 10 different tools and kind of like look for things and get questions answered. Let's say you make one LLM. Well, the thing is that, not every single person in the enterprise should be able to ask or get access to financial questions or financial insights or some secret projects that are being worked on, and etc. So how does a LLM, let's say once you assume there's an LLM, how does it actually work inside the large organization with that manages that maintains the access controls, that has audit trail, and that has kind of the right access patterns to the corpus of data for it being refreshed. And so I think we're going to see. I think that it's an unsolved problem, but it's something that probably like industry needs to look at it, and should look at it very quickly.
Got it. That's a really good point. All right, another quick hot one. Oh, go ahead. Do you want to answer?
I was just going to add that, like, the infrastructure challenge, in addition to what Manu's saying, the infrastructure challenge is far more challenging here because of the scale that things are happening at and the need for cost efficiency. And I think, this is an area where if you can provide infrastructure that enables you to do this in a performance and, cost-effective way, and at the same time enhances, your team's, like the ML team's velocity, ability to ship products quickly, that's an area you can add a lot of value. And this is things like making sure developers don't have to think about, scalability, make sure they can just focus on their machine learning logic, right? They don't have to, once they develop the model, that they can easily start serving it, right? They can start deploying it and not have to, hand it off to another team, or have to have another tech stack built, that's different from training and for serving. So all of these things, challenges around scalability, infrastructure, cost efficiency are where we see teams spending a lot of time.
Got it. And with that is time. Thank you everyone for attending this amazing session. And thank you so much to the speakers. You guys gave a lot of hot takes and hypotheses in a space that is still kind of exponentially growing. So
check back next year and see who's right.
I think if there's even one prediction from this, webinar that's accurate, I'm going to send you a cake. Cool. Well, thank you all so much for being here. If you have any further questions for these amazing founders, they'll be in our Slack community. You can ask them any other hot takes. But appreciate you all being here, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day at Observe.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you all. Bye.